Everybody, I want to welcome you to Power on Your Plate. Today, we are going to be tackling a subject that's very near and dear to my heart, and that is aging. As many of you know, I talk a lot about the issues that we deal with having aging parents, as well as being at the Institute for Neuroimmune Medicine. We are looking a lot at neuroinflammatory disorders, things like Alzheimer's. So I brought on the best of the best. It's Dr. Melissa Batchelor is going to be joining us today. She's the director at George Washington University of Interdisciplinary Center for Aging, Health, and Humanities. Dr. Batchelor has an incredibly successful podcast called This is Getting Old. Dr. Batchelor, thank you so much for coming here and talking to my community today. I always love talking to you about this kind of topic.
Thank you so much. I'm a huge fan of your work as well.
Well,
in fact, look, I have 3 books. And I had the cucumber salad for lunch today.
I love it. Well, welcome to the community. I will tell you, putting power on your plate and focusing on nutrition can always be critical and important, but definitely in the aging body. And so I appreciate you coming on. Dr. Batchelor, can you tell me a little bit more about, kind of your professional career? What brought you to where you're at today?
Sure. So I'm a nurse practitioner, nurse educator, and nurse researcher. And I've been working in the aging and long-term care health space for about 25 years. So in my research role, I developed an intervention called NOSH, which stands for Nurses Optimizing Supportive Hand Feeding. And with the podcast, I use This is Getting Old, moving towards an age-friendly world. While we talk about aging, age-friendly initiatives, and Alzheimer's disease, it's really about all of this stuff in the world that's not ready for an aging population. That's what's really getting old. So use the podcast to teach caregivers of people living with Alzheimer's disease how to manage meal times and other daily care issues. And that's kind of it in a nutshell.
So can I ask you what was your motivation or your inspiration? Was it early on in your career? Was it, like you just said, this is getting old, the lack of support, or what was kind of because this is not just a job. I've watched you use your passion and your drive to change legislation. This is research and trials. And so tell me, where does that come from?
So I think that when my first job out of nursing school was in a nursing home, and
right.
No one else in my graduating class went into long-term care. And when I got there, I really didn't like what I saw, but I decided to stay for 2 years and really do the best job I could do at the bedside, and then became a nurse practitioner to make a difference in my community and got my PhD to kind of change the world. And I've done that through teaching students, because I've never had a student walk into my class and say, hey, I can't wait to work with older adults, and I really want to work in a nursing home. No. So I've always had to kind of sell geriatrics, to kind of recruit students into this field. And then when I thought about my PhD, I thought, well, I love to eat. I love to take care of older adults with Alzheimer's disease. And I think that the staff and caregivers need more training. And so that's kind of where all that came together. Through all of that, I've used social media to kind of engage students, to engage with the public, which is where the podcast work comes from. And then in 2018, I had the opportunity to do a health and aging policy fellowship and served in the United States Senate on the Special Committee for Aging in Senator Susan Collins' office. And one of the initiatives that we worked on was the Bold Alzheimer's Act. And that
say that one more time. It was the
Bold Alzheimer's Act.
Wonderful.
And that initiative is engaging our public health departments to provide brain health education to our communities. And that legislation now is being rolled out. In fact, Washington, D.C. was just given a grant to educate the public about brain health and prevention. And I really think that, having read a lot of your stuff and listened to your podcast as well, that this issue of inflammation and lifestyle changes, there's so much within our control. And I think it begins with kind of these pillars of diet, exercise, and sleep. Like if you're really paying attention to those 3 things, you have there's a lot of control. And I think a lot of people just don't realize that they have that much control over this disease.
So oftentimes when we get individuals that are more of an aging population, we talk about, or I feel like, and we talk about this as clinicians a lot, is I wish we could have had some interventions early on. I think that there's a lot of nutrition interventions around early childhood, right? I mean, I don't always agree with all of them, but there is at least a lot of conversation about early childhood. And then we get into our hyper productive years, right? And we really rob our bodies of nutrition. Are you of the belief system on the side of the table that feels like we're building a foundation as we're younger, in our maybe even age demographic? Do you think that nutrition now impacts how you age later?
Yeah, I mean, so anything that's age friendly is a lifespan approach. And I think that these lifestyle choices it's a cumulative effect. So like when you're born, you kind of have incremental milestones that you master in childhood. But as we age, it becomes a crapshoot because of all the decisions that we make on a daily basis. Right. And I was actually thinking today, I'm, dealing with my son who's having some health challenges. And, I really feel like his diet could be one of the things that we need to modify. And I was thinking to myself, I was like, why aren't high schoolers taught like nutritional competencies? Like I didn't get a single nutrition class until I was in nursing school.
Yeah.
But it changed the way I ate and the way I thought about nutrition just from that one semester of coursework. And now I've become kind of a lifelong learner, which is another age-friendly principle.
But
trying to learn.
To mention that, I just want to throw that in here. We had a really interesting thing happen. My kids were in public school and we lost our science teacher halfway through the school. And they reached out to me and they said, hey, can you kind of jump in and, do some, and I'm like, only if we can make things that like explode and are exciting. And my daughter at the time was actually in kindergarten. And so I was covering, we were supposed to get somebody hired. And I said, look, I want to teach to what I know. So we put a garden in kindergarten. And then my son would have been in third grade. I did it all the way through while he was in fourth grade. We went full blown into nutrition, growing food and eating food. And now all of those kids are like 25, 26 years old. And it's so interesting to me because they have such a passion for it. And I mean, don't want to say that I, instilled that passion, but somebody, right, should be talking to them about that. And we see it and this is how I got to the kids, right? Was I brought in and talked about examples of like professional athletes. So my little kids, my peanuts, I was like, look, who wants to jump faster? Who wants to, climb higher? Okay, broccoli and Brussels sprouts. And just to show them how the Brussels sprouts grew was like blew their mind that it grew on stalks. But yeah, right. But I think to that perspective, I was really diligent when my kids went away to college about their nutrition. Obviously I'm indoctrinated, right? For what you and I both, right? We both go, yes, you have to do it. But what I don't think sometimes we realize is that our aging process and the outcome of our aging process is significantly influenced early on. And we see that if we just talk about bone density alone, right? That they say, women build their bone density to about 35 and then it's pretty much an exchange from there on afterwards, or their capacity. So I want to go back to Alzheimer's specifically. There's a lot of theories on why we're seeing such an explosion of this diagnosis or the presence of symptoms. And I think there's a lot of, and I know in your research, I've read a lot of it, there's a lot of different ideas. Do you think there are things that we can look at from a lifestyle perspective that could potentially not express, maybe if we have the gene propensity towards it, not express that genetic outcome?
Yeah, I mean, there's actually a lot that you can do. Again, thinking about the modifiable risk factors, age in and of itself is the number one risk factor. But, going back to that diet, nutrition, sleep, and exercise, kind of those three pillars, those are within your control. But actually, I think the thing that we can control even more, and that I think a lot of people aren't thinking about, is actually what we think about aging. There's been some recent work that's come out by Dr. Rebecca Levy that talks about our own beliefs about aging can determine how, like longevity, impacts our longevity. So if you have positive beliefs about aging, if you kind of embrace it, you feel like you have control over like your diet, your exercise, and you think that aging is a time of vitality, and it doesn't equal decay and decline automatically. You can live 7.5 years longer than someone who has kind of internalized ageist beliefs.
I love that book. Goddesses Never Age. Are you Women's Wisdom, Women's Bodies? She writes a lot of really amazing literature. She goes as far as don't ask for the senior citizen discount. Don't even, which I said, wait a minute, we're talking financials here. But
Right.
just, yeah, but it was, she goes, pretty far in it, but it's to your point, it's the perspective of aging of, my mom and I were at the ranch the other day and we were moving horse corrals. My mom is 80, right? And I'm like, come on, grab the other end. And we're lifting these back with these big panels. And she looked at me and she said, thank you for always including me in a physical lifestyle that is maybe some people might not view as age appropriate. And I said, I'm like, look, honey, I need the help. Come on, let's go. But honestly, I tried to do that. And we just, kayaked in France, and everybody says, your mom was out kayaking. And I said, absolutely. So it's, again, this has touched me in our lives where we're trying to change the perspective that, and she's retired now from her practice. But I didn't want her to, go up to the mountains and kind of hide away and diminish her lifestyle and her vitality.
Right. So
right.
She obviously has positive aging beliefs, and you're supporting that. So you're kind of bucking society and culture. I mean, ageism is so bad globally that the World Health Organization and the United Nations both have global campaigns to combat ageism. So it's the only ism that we usually don't talk about when we have our DEI conversations, but it has very harmful health impacts on us.
So you think we can project them on ourselves, right? By saying, like, I have clients and I say, oh, no, you don't get to say that. Well, for my age, weight loss is difficult. For my age, Haylie, you can't expect me to have an abundance of energy throughout the day. And I just go, talk to me when you're 106 and I might lay off. I might right. not, but I might, right? That vitality. Yeah. So can you give me some examples of societal ageism that you feel like are really prevalent and causing a lot of harm right now?
Oh, yeah. Birthday cards. I got a ton of them, but birthday cards, I've actually been really proud of my friends. I mean, I turned 51 this year, but a lot of them are turning 50, 51. And I've only actually seen 2 ageist birthday parties. And maybe they're just not putting them on Facebook, or the algorithm is preventing me from seeing them, but they're not, that over the hill kind of with the walker and like the little tombstones, rest in peace.
Yeah. The gray wig.
Yeah, like all of that stuff is ridiculous. So birthday card, not buying, like looking at, like I have a whole pile here of like ageist birthday cards. So that's one industry. And actually there's some work out of Colorado where they actually have hired artists to develop age-friendly birthday cards. The health and beauty industry is another example. Why do we have anti-aging campaigns? I'm actually participating in a contest right now called Fab Over 40. And I love it because it's not only raising money and awareness about breast cancer, but it's celebrating women over the age of 40, through like this kind of global competition. So that's been fun. And so that's actually one magazine, New Beauty, is different than all of the others that kind of attract 18 to 35, or that's who they target. They're actually celebrating women over the age of 40.
Right. Even Boom Cosmetics, which they say is one of the most, smartest marketing campaigns to come out since, I don't know, probably Can You Hear Me Now or something like that. But how they embrace your age and your beauty associated with that. Let's shift gears just a smidge. I want to ask you about certain micronutrients. So with inflammation, and I know that you mentioned that, and you had talked a little bit about different things that you like to see incorporated. I'd like to talk about fats or lipids for a little bit, because we went on this kind of crazy craze, in my opinion, for a while where everything was low fat diet. And unfortunately, that umbrella embraced healthy fats like omega-3s and things of that nature. What do you see with that having a nutrition impact in aging? I mean, I have very strong feelings about people getting enough lipids.
Right. So from everything that I've read, and even with the way that I eat myself, I think that a lot of the products that are geared towards being like low fat, anything that's processed. I think those types of foods are more detrimental than, kind of clean eating, or
Right.
eating foods to kind of recognize the on wrapper. I think that was something I learned from Sesame Street when I was like 3. But, like an orange is in its own wrapper, a banana's in its own wrapper.
They don't have to be marketed as gluten-free, right?
Right. I think that some, go ahead.
No, I was just saying the other thing is in that labeling, that wrapper thing, like, so trans fatty acids, right? They talk so much about how detrimental it is to fertility, to memory, to cognition. But what people don't realize is a lot of the companies that have trans fatty acids, you don't have to, unless it's more than one, if it's more than 1 gram, you have to put it on the packaging. So there's a lot of like crackers that say, no trans fatty acids, right? And because the serving size, so they reduced the serving size. When I was working with Food Inc., this was like a big one where I just went, why doesn't everybody know this? They reduced the serving size so that it's like 0.99 grams per serving. So they can put trans fat free. But if you're eating more than 2 of the crackers, you're above the serving size and you're getting 4 to 6 grams of trans fatty acids every day. Like, there's such a bad issue with labeling right now. And it's just gotten worse. And we saw, when you see your serving size shrink, it'll be interesting. And I don't know if you saw, California is recently trying to eliminate some of the food additives and preservatives that are known neurotoxins, some of the red dyes, some of the additives, preservatives, and chemicals. So it's a good move because it's not in other countries. Yeah.
Right. Well, and so here's something that I think about a lot too. So my grandmother, she passed away last year, but she had pretty much always lived on a farm.
Yes.
And so just by default, pretty much always had an organic diet.
Yes.
But then as processed foods were, kind of introduced into our culture and into our society, she ate a lot of those things as well, but she ended up never really getting past kind of mild dementia. And so if you think about from us, dementia, we have a booming demographic, but actually the rates of dementia are actually beginning to shrink a little bit. Now that might have to do with life expectancy. It might have to do with what we eat. But I do think going back to kind of not eating processed foods, and, even looking at your books and the recipes that you have, those are kind of the root source of foods, not
right.
And really kind of getting your nutritional, either your macronutrients or micronutrients in that way. And, eating organic as much as you can.
Right.
I think those are the things that we can do really for kind of to promote brain health.
So I amen. And I absolutely agree. We've got to protect the brain. And so often our brains are a dumping ground for toxins, unfortunately. Melissa, there's a couple questions that I have. So we're the same age, actually. Many of my girlfriends are now helping their parents or starting to look at being in a situation of needing to help their parents. And I know that you have a couple of incredible support systems for people like myself that are wanting to look at, how we can help our aging parents, our grandparents, maybe even, you have some support groups. Can you share a little bit about that with me?
Sure. So I have one support group. It's called Sharing and Caring with Melissa B, PhD. And that is a group where you get kind of my professional input, guidance, as well as access to a membership library with resources. But then you also you're in a peer group. They meet with me once a week, but then they're in a peer group. So they have peer-to-peer support. So they're there with people that are going through the same thing. And they can ask questions and kind of group problem solve. But then I'm overseeing all that to make sure that they're giving each other, good advice, or at least helping point them in the right direction. So that's one option. And then if you either have questions yourself about aging, or you're like somebody about our age who's maybe caring for aging parents,
right?
And you're like, you've gotten a diagnosis of Alzheimer's and you're just like, I'm so overwhelmed by all this content on the internet. Like, I just have very specific questions that I want somebody to answer. I also have one-on-one consulting times available, and you can access both of those and read more about them at melissabphd.com under Work With Me. That's the tab at the top.
That's great. I think a lot of people in my community really need support navigating this. We talk again a lot about food and nutrition, but there is a very special aspect that comes into that. We've talked, and I've talked to you before, but I'd love for you to kind of share with our community issues that come up, things like texture. And sometimes we get a lot of questions, our coaches get a lot of questions about clients that aren't wanting to eat, or how we can make the nutrition, every bite, super nutrient dense or purposeful, because it's hard to sometimes get that in. Can you share a little bit with our community about some of the things that you see? And again, I know that they need, I want them to be able to come to you and talk to you, but some tips that everybody can kind of think about as we're dealing with that.
Right. So one of the struggles that caregivers often face is kind of, how do I prepare a meal that's healthy for me and, the person that I'm caring for? And if that person has an issue with chewing or swallowing, they may have to adapt those textures so that maybe I can eat, a regular diet and they need mechanical soft, which is basically just chopping everything up, or maybe they need their food pureed. And, so how do you take a dish that you're going to prepare for yourself and adapt it to those textures so that you can accommodate that person who's living with Alzheimer's disease, not only to promote their independence in feeding themselves, but also if you do have to provide hand feeding assistance, that, that we're kind of optimizing their intake. And I think that, kind of looking through recipes and trying to make sure that you're thinking through, like, okay, like, for example, like a crock pot dish.
Yeah.
Or soups, like those are things that you can easily puree, or like smoothies, like your mango.
We have tons of smoothie
mango
recipes. Absolutely. So it's interesting that you're saying that, because oftentimes, like, if people have GI stress or they're extremely exhausted or extremely fatigued, we do a lot of that pureeing, a lot of those pureeing of the soups, a lot of the pureeing of the smoothies. And I think sometimes people think like, oh, Haylie just likes a smoothie or whatever, or she thinks that would be kind of a fun thing to add to a cookbook. But there is some aspect of that manual breaking down of the foods, or beginning that process, that in a body that's extremely stressed or having a hard time extracting nutrients, that it can actually help with deliverability too. So I love that. Look, I send your podcast link out to so many people. You have, no, it's again, being in at the Institute for Neuroimmune Medicine, we have a lot of neuroinflammatory exposure with a lot of clients and patients that come through there. I love that, and we love that in our group as a resource. And so I'm going to make that available. Make sure that everybody has the link to your podcast. Yep. Yeah. There's a lot of reasons why I send people to your podcast, or I have them listen to your podcast. And in me listening to it personally, there's a lot of tips that you give that I never would have thought about. Things that a caregiver can do from a practical perspective right away. And one of them was you talk a lot about flavorings. So can you give me some, there's one in particular that I'm thinking of, but can you give me some ideas of how a caregiver can entice the individual that they're caring for to get nutrient dense foods in?
Right. So at a certain point in this disease, people really may not eat foods the way we typically prepare them. And so one of the ways that you can flavor build, I think a lot of people would think, oh, well, I just need to put more salt on this particular dish. But actually what happens with Alzheimer's disease is it responds more to sweet foods and to sugar. And so in my training, I talk to primarily nursing home staff and caregivers, to let them know, like, it's actually better for us to put sweetener, whether it's stevia, like you can still use a healthy sweet, maybe even like a fruit, but put that on top of the green beans or the carrots, because just adding that, is going to make that person eat it more, because, they can taste the sweet component. So like getting it at a person with Alzheimer's disease, and sometimes even if you don't, people eat sweets,
Right.
like our brain loves it and it fires it up. And so, to think through, maybe we can let go of kind of restricting the fats and the salts, and the sugar. And you really have to try to play with those 3 flavors to get that person to eat.
So it's interesting that you say that, because I noticed that with my grandma a lot. I mean, and so people would come and they would bring her, C's candies, or she always wanted those little hard candies. And so some of the recipes actually, and I even have her dishes and her cast iron skillet and her salt and pepper shaker in the last cookbook that I did. Yeah. But some of those recipes are things that I made her so that she could have when she was, as she was aging, and she was well into her 90s at the time. But I made a cacao chocolate power ball. And so I would put, like the nut butters and stuff to have the healthy fats and all of that in there. But I also love to use we have a caramel stevia, and she loved that. And then the other thing that I would do is when I would make her Brussels sprouts, I would use turkey bacon. I would use the yellow onions, which can kind of sweeten it a little bit, but I would caramelize them again with a little bit of, I actually would use apricots, and, just puree that a little bit, and a little bit of water in the pan. And and a little bit of, usually like an olive oil or something. And I would caramelize her Brussels sprouts. And it's just very interesting that you said that. I would just try to go with what she wanted or what she liked. I also, it's funny you mentioned the mango smoothie. That was a Grandma Gigi recipe. That was me trying to get, I would put I know it makes me, it's hard, but, yeah. but not, to your point, not saying, no, you can't have candy. No, you can't have chocolates. I would hide in, some really strong nutrients. And then on the salt perspective, because, there's the hydration issue and all of that, I found that I used Celtic salt, which would help not affect her blood pressure. But I would make chickpeas, like get the like garbanzo beans, right? And I would shake them in salt. I would actually shake them in salt. Then I'd put some sort of either like, a pureed apricot or pureed dark cherry, and I would shake them up and I would bake them. She would love that. And then I would put the Celtic salt on it. So that's, I appreciate you giving us permission, and those kinds of tips that you do on your podcast were really impactful, right? As I'm trying to, I show love through feeding people, right? That's kind of right. The power. Yeah.
Most of us do.
Yeah. And we also reduce stress by feeding ourselves. And so if we can think about that. So Melissa, in your group setting, can I call it like a support group for those of us that are taking care of individuals that are in this state? Or, I mean, is everybody are they in a caregiving setting? The individuals that are in your support group?
Yeah, not necessarily institutional setting. It's typically more people that are at home and trying to figure things out like this. It's like I'm having, it's like with my grandmother, my mom was like, you need to come stay with me for like a week. And like, because they were bringing her out of the nursing home. And I have a couple of podcasts about just some of the stuff I was teaching her as a caregiver. Right. One was like, just how do we shampoo her hair when she can't get in the shower and we don't have like a beautician bowl. And I was like, well, we could just shampoo her hair in a chair. So I just did an episode about that. But it's learning practical things like, okay, they've sent her home with me or him home with me. And now I have to figure out how to do all this stuff. And it's not like there's a class you can take. I mean, there are some classes, sporadically that you can take, but the support group is really where you can be in a group with other people, other caregivers. And it doesn't have to be Alzheimer's disease because, there are a lot of the same challenges with Parkinson's and, diabetes, that type of stuff. But it's just a place to come get practical problem solving strategies where, you can share what you're trying to do. Like even, we need to, and it doesn't even have to be with the one-on-one. It could be like, how do I get my mom, to this particular doctor's appointment?
Right.
And some communities have different transportation services, and it's more door through door instead of like Uber, which is door to door.
Right. Right.
you know.
No, those kinds of things have been super helpful for our community. I love one thing that I just want to circle back to, and I want to make sure we wrap up it with, is that it's important to care for ourselves now, especially if you're an individual in a caregiving role. And not only, yeah,
And it is. I think I did like 3 podcasts ago talking about caregiver stress.
yes.
And if you don't, one of the things that I was always taught in nursing school was if you don't take care of yourself, you can't take care of anybody else.
Right.
So, a lot of caregivers end up dying before the person with Alzheimer's, because the person with Alzheimer's disease is just living in the present moment. They don't have the care in the world. Right. They don't remember yesterday. They're not worried about tomorrow. And as a caregiver, it's hard for you to stay in the moment. And so those are some of the other things to help caregivers with, to recognize their own stress and burnout, and, to be making sure that you're taking care of your own nutrition and exercise, and, making sure you have respite care.
Yes.
Sleep.
Yeah. And that's so Melissa, I always appreciate talking to you. You have so many incredible tips for individuals, for all of us that are going to stay in the positive mindset of having an abundance of energy, and skipping and dancing into this next phase, this next season of our lives with excitement. I love the practical tips that you give everybody that again can encourage a healthier progression of this disease, for sure. But I think the special place that you've done for us and for so many people in our community, and why we get out your podcast a lot, is to remind everybody that you've got to take care of yourself so that you can care for others. Our community is built on individuals that have learned, and unfortunately not usually through an easy journey, what happens, when we don't cherish this precious physical body that we're walking through the world with. And so I always appreciate the tips and the ideas and the permission to give my grandma nutritious sweets, but also to the permission to take care of ourselves as caregivers. And so you guys, please make sure, Melissa, please tell me again. I know our community is going to reach out and lean into the support that you're providing, both in the group setting and in the one-on-one. Can you give us another time? How is the best way for my community to reach out to you?
Most likely through my podcast, which is melissabphd.com. And from there, you can connect with me on all my social media outlets, as well as, the YouTube channel. You can subscribe to my newsletter, and then find the audio only platforms that the podcast is available in. And you can also sign up for a free information session about the sharing and caring with Melissa B. PhD, and or make an appointment to ask one-on-one questions.
That's amazing, Melissa. And you guys, if you are in any kind of a caregiving role, whether it's, for your kids, for your parents, for your grandparents, or even on a professional level, like all of the clinicians in our office, Melissa, we listen to your podcast. Please make sure that you're taking care of yourself. Lean into Melissa's incredible tips. She is, changing the world from a political perspective, but also from all of us from a one-on-one perspective. So Melissa, thank you so much for being on. Our community is always so enriched by your generosity of helping us navigate this really difficult process.
Well, thank you so much for having me on, and I'm glad that we finally connected and got to do this.
I love it. We'll do more, and we'll talk soon. Have a good one.
All right.